name is Scott Becker. I'm editor-in-chief of RedmondMag.com, and as the moderator of today's event, I'm pleased to welcome you to the Microsoft Azure Stack HCI Summit. For anyone working with hybrid and private cloud environments, Azure Stack HCI is one of Microsoft's most important initiatives, and there's a lot of activity going on around it right now, so it's a timely topic. We've got a great event planned for you today, starting with a session from two of Redmond Mag's best independent technical experts on Microsoft Cloud and infrastructure topics. They're followed by some really informative and timely material coming in the second hour from our sponsors, Microsoft and Data On. Before we start today's event, we do have some announcements. First, we wanted to let you know this event is being recorded and will be available for future view. So you'll receive an email when the replay is available, generally within the next few days. And each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your consoles that come up. We've got great experts on the call today, so get all your questions answered. During today's second session, we'll be giving away a Surface Pro 7, but you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. Finally, we do have resources from our sponsors, Microsoft and Data On, and those are available on the console right now, so please download and check those out. It's because of Microsoft and Data On underwriting this content that we can bring you the event. There's some great, useful resources there for you, so don't miss those. Now, on to the first session of today's summit, which is Microsoft's hybrid cloud offering, what you need to know now about Azure Stack HCI innovation. So this session features Dave Kawula and John O'Neill Sr. Dave is the founder and managing principal consultant at Tricon Elite Consulting. He's a longtime Microsoft MVP, currently in the cloud and data center management category. And he's a regular speaker at Microsoft conferences and at Redmond's Tech Mentor and Live 360 shows. So John is also a longtime Microsoft MVP and a speaker and writer for us, as well as a CTO at MFG Companies in Ohio and an independent consultant. And to the point for this summit, both John and Dave are working with Storage Spaces Direct and Azure Stack HCI on a daily basis. So their thoughts and strategies are from the field and as real world as it gets. So Dave and John, welcome, and please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for the warm introduction. I know that John and I are really pleased to be part of this amazing event. I know that for both of us, our journey started with Microsoft Storage many years ago, and to see the innovations and to see how far this has come is pretty awesome. So with that, John, should we go ahead and get started with the show?
Absolutely, Dave. I did want to also thank Scott for the great introduction and for the invite to be part of this. I always enjoy and benefit from these discussions where we get together and really hash out the technology that we're using to improve our organizations from day to day.
Awesome. Well, let's get going, John. Got a lot of really amazing content to cover here. And so how we want to start off, I know our session's on Azure Stack HCI, but, I'm out in the field a lot, and, you've got a lot of this technology in with your organizations that you work with as well. And I just wanted to address one of the questions of, what has happened with, Storage Spaces Direct. This is kind of where we have cut our teeth. Actually, literally wrote a book on Storage Spaces Direct back in the earliest version for 2016 when it first released. And just wanted to touch on, what's happening with Storage Spaces Direct. So for those of you on-prem, it's still available in the on-prem LTSC version. You can still run it virtualized up in Azure if you want to. It's available as part of the core kernel. It's still in 2016, 2019, and the newest flagship release, Server 2022, which I'm very excited about. Every few years we get to rave about the newest operating systems that are out, and that's a big one. It's still supported. Yeah, absolutely still supported. Fully supported from Microsoft, from your vendors, still have vendor-supported builds. But with that, we're not here to talk about Storage Spaces Direct. We're here to talk about Azure Stack HCI and a bunch of these innovations. Now, John, one of the things that I wanted to just ask you about with Storage Spaces Direct, do you still see a lot of Storage Spaces Direct out in the field today?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like all things in the Microsoft stack, right? Organizations are more like a freighter than they are like a fast attack boat, to use that analogy, right? They don't turn on a dime, they turn over time, is like how I put it. And what that means is that people adopted Storage Spaces Direct, and yeah, they're excited and they want to leverage Azure Stack HCI and all those things and the evolutions that occurred since then. But they're steering that 400-foot long freighter, so the turn is a bit slower and takes a lot more time. And because of that, you still find this in organizations, and it still needs to be supported, and it still needs to be treated for what it is, which is a mission-critical system. I mean, people that deploy Storage Spaces Direct or did deploy Storage Spaces Direct, they are deploying it to support their production workloads, right? These aren't things that you can just take offline and mess with or whatever. They are day-to-day critical to these organizations.
Absolutely, John. And with that note, before we move on to our next talking point, is I still have customers out there today running on the what I'll call Storage Spaces Direct 1.0, our first version of hyper-converged infrastructure that Microsoft kind of created for us. And that's still running major customers in financial institutions. This is running major retailers. And what I'm finding is they're looking at the next-gen technology as we're coming up on a hardware life cycle. And from what I've seen is that most organizations are still kind of rolling with that 48-month to 60-month life cycle. They want to try to get their full 5 years out of their gear. And when it's coming due, like it is for a lot of these 2016 clusters that are out there today, we're starting to see this as a very good opportunity to start introducing the next-gen technology that we've got for customers that have experience with the tech.
And I'm glad you threw that out there, Dave, because I just want to throw in that, I remember my dad when I was young so clearly saying to me, yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And a lot of customers look that way. So one of our key jobs is to prove that, Storage Spaces Direct may not be broke, but there is so much more value to be added to the evolution that has occurred with it, right? And so that's part of the deal, right, is convincing our customers and our leadership teams that, this is up and running and running our production workloads and everything else, but we can gain all these things from the latest iterations of Azure Stack HCI.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about our next-gen hyper-converged infrastructure from Microsoft. And so realistically, I almost consider Azure Stack HCI to be kind of moving into like a Gen 3, Gen 4 technology from my perspective. And when I look at the investments that Microsoft has made in this, probably one of the biggest ones for me is that they actually moved the Azure Stack HCI product lineup out to its own separate SKU. It's no longer just a part of Windows Server. You can still use Storage Spaces Direct, which is an underlying technology that Azure Stack HCI will use. But if you want to go with the full Azure Stack HCI SKU, one of the biggest things you're going to benefit from, John, is a completely separate support organization that's dedicated to Azure Stack HCI. This was one of the key talking points at every conference that I went to. Customers were saying, listen, we need some dedicated platform support for this particular tech. And you know what? Microsoft listened, and they listened so much that they actually took this to the next level, and they created this as a whole new product lineup. And so when you phone in for support now inside of those Azure Stack HCI Microsoft hotlines, you're getting a dedicated support organization. So those are kind of the two big ones for me. How about yourself, John?
Well, I've got to go with the support with you because, that's one of the critical things, right? Let's look at an organization and the leadership leans on IT to not only ensure that, max value is coming back to the organization through the technologies we deploy, but also to provide that rapid response recovery when something happens. I mean, this is something we think about a lot in terms of cybersecurity and malware events, ransomware events, that kind of thing. But in terms of general technology, it's all about the support. when something happens to, a cluster in a storage spaces direct implementation and an Azure Stack HCI implementation, we are typically going to be talking about production down or production limited scenarios. These are things that are affecting manufacturing floors, distribution warehouses, right? Sales teams, telemarketers. It doesn't matter. It's affecting something. So IT, if they can't identify the problem and fix it immediately, if they need help, they need to understand and have absolute confidence that when they dial that, 1-800-HELP-ME Microsoft number, that they are getting a set of professional resources that can, help them get this thing back up and running immediately. So that separation into a distinct support organization is, 10 times over my biggest selling point for Azure Stack HCI, the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then two other points that we'll just quickly talk on here, John, is that the traditional data center license all of your servers on kind of a per process or a per core basis. Those have changed. I'll defer any of the licensing conversations to my wonderful friends at Microsoft because I don't claim to be a licensing expert, never have been, but it is a different licensing model with Azure Stack HCI. And the other big thing is that Microsoft has really unified the operational experience of Azure Stack HCI compared to what we would see in the on-prem version of traditional storage spaces direct. We wanted to be able to deploy VMs with that same Azure portal type look and feel. We want to take and manage them. We wanted to take advantage of, role-based management and things like that in similar way that we can get, privileged identity management solutions inside of the Azure portal to manage all of our Azure Stack HCI infrastructure. And so that true Azure-like experience is another area that I feel that Microsoft's done a very good job listening to customers about. So that innovation, the innovation that surrounds this platform, John, is pretty incredible to me. And one of the big ones for myself is, I am what you'd know as the mechanic of the organization. I'm the one that you call when things go bump in the night and something's going wrong. So you're going to lose a cache drive. You're going to lose one of your capacity drives. Something's going to be going wrong. We're going to be seeing performance issues. And these are the typical type of support calls that I'll get from a hardware perspective with actually any storage appliance. They all face similar problems. And so one of the biggest issues, and I was kind of laughing about this when I was building the slide deck because I talk about this with all of our customers, is the hardest thing to troubleshoot with any type of SAN or storage array is that kind of failing drive. And that kind of failing drive is going to impact performance. And when it does eventually die, it's how easy is it to actually move that out of the arrays and stuff. So my question for you, John, in your experience with Azure Stack HCI and these technologies, and by the way, this technology is actually included all the way back to Server 2019. So it's not just with Azure Stack HCI that we can leverage this. Have you had to use this with any of your production implementations yet, John, with these failing drives?
Absolutely, and here's why. Anybody that's ever been a part of a team that I've led or been part of knows that I have this constant mantra of it doesn't matter what we face, our job is to ensure our customers never know it, right? So it doesn't matter how hard we have to work, it doesn't matter the weekends, the night hours, whatever. If we do our job correctly, our customers will just think that system is singing along. And I don't care if it's an internal customer or an external customer. I don't, differentiate between the customers that you serve when, they're your fellow employees of organization X, or if you're a system integrator providing consulting services. It doesn't matter. These are still customers, and you still want to deliver that A++ customer experience. And part of that is by having a predictive, proactive mentality. And this technology brings the technology together with the mentality, and it's so very important. I think of the kind of failing drive as so important, because when people go, well, what does that mean when you talk about that? Because, Dave, I've mentioned the same thing as you when we talk about the kind of failing approach. And what I tell them is it's kind of like this. In a modern car, modern cars all have computers and sensors and everything else. And along those lines, when they get bad data from a sensor or things they don't understand, the car goes into this what's called limp home mode. And so you can only drive at a limited speed, and the car really runs, badly. And so what I tell people is that, if the car is limited to running at 25 miles per hour, you might not notice that or think it's that big of a deal when you're 3 minutes from home. But what about when you're 3 hours from home? If you had to drive home at 25 miles per hour, you would think that kind of failing car is a big deal. And so I treat kind of failing drives that same way. Eventually, their impact will be noticed by the customer, and that means IT failed to do their job and keep the customer from being affected.
Yeah, absolutely. And along those lines of hardware as well, the innovation is actually driven and can be viewed through Microsoft's Windows Admin Center, as well as hardware and module plugins from our best vendors out there that support Azure Stack HCI. I'll give a plug to Data On here. They were gracious enough to sponsor this event. Their Must platform was one of the first ones that was launched in industry as integration with Windows Admin Center. And so now we can actually go in and do drive lane indication. We can get a view of our storage. We can see everything that we need to see from a hardware and operational perspective. So I know my good friend Cosmos Darwin was a big part of the PM group that worked on this particular feature at Microsoft. And this is one of my hands-down favorite big innovations with Azure Stack HCI and Storage Spaces Direct. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about deployment experience. So let's talk about the deployment experience with traditional Storage Spaces Direct, John. So traditionally we would do this with some hardened kind of PowerShell scripts that we have. We work with our great friends at Data On, and they provide just such excellent guidance around scripts that are baked and tested for the builds of Storage Spaces Direct. So one of the things that Microsoft worked very hard on was to create a unified UI experience to deploying Azure Stack HCI and Storage Spaces Direct. And so this can actually be automated through Windows Admin Center. And one of the coolest parts of this for me, John, and this is where a lot of customers fall down with their configurations, is getting their RDMA, their remote direct memory access and ROCKY configurations or iWork configurations right on the networking side. And that automated Windows Admin Center deployment helps us make sure that that is absolutely rock solid. And I know that, for yourself, being, a long-standing network engineer and having set up many manufacturing plants all over North America, networking is just so fundamental to get right. And so, kind of what are your thoughts about this automation and deployment that Microsoft is providing us through Admin Center?
Well, so I'm always a fan of automation, particularly from the benefits it brings in terms of repeatability, right? It amazes me how often we can have deployments one after another, and let's face it, that's a common theme. I mean, a lot of organizations, they don't just have a single data center or a single set of servers or clusters or anything else. They have multiple deployments that are necessary. And so repeatability, the ability to produce the same results time in and time out, is huge, and automation brings that, right? Checklists are great for helping. I mean, it's a lot better than just doing it ad hoc, but checklists evolve into automation. And so I'm huge on that, and particularly when it comes to the network, right? There's a long-standing axiom that, whatever it is, it's DNS's fault. But with that being said, it's true that, when networking doesn't work, nothing works, because networking is the foundation for collaboration between our equipment, between our technologies, between our users. And so getting the network portion right every time is a critical component. And I do believe that Azure Stack HCI has really evolved and leaped forward in terms of how it handles the networking configuration components.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? One of the other big issues that we'll run into with the networking configuration, John, especially when we're dealing with the cluster, is configuration drift. It's, you need to make sure that you're making identical settings on every single cluster node to make sure that you maintain that kind of unified experience. So another good friend of ours that works on the Microsoft networking team, Dan Kuhnel, has actually authored a tester PowerShell script called Validate DCB. Data center bridging is a technology inside of Windows that we use to kind of activate that RDMA, that offload technology with what we do. And so one of the things, and one of the reasons I put this into the slide deck today, John, is I'm working with a large Canadian federal customer right now, and they're in the process of, they're doing that life cycle like I talked about earlier. They're all in for Hyper-V. They're all in for Hyper-V clustering. They're running on Server 2016. Life cycle time's coming up, so now they're all in on, Azure Stack HCI. And one of the things that's interesting to me from an operational perspective is the fact that they're actually using Validate DCB on almost a kind of, we'll call it bi-weekly basis to scout the clusters to make sure that there isn't a configuration drift. And that Validate DCB tool for us actually helped us discover a faulty 100 gig network adapter in one of our nodes because the results were not coming back the same. So that was kind of a big one for me with Validate DCB. And then the other big one is just, the native integration and management from Azure. All right. So our next big piece that I want to talk about here is, and this has been big. I've been a Hyper-V guy since day one, John. And active clustering has always been the utopia for me, being able to spread that across individual sites. And so from an innovation perspective, stretch clustering support is so huge. And, you look at some of the implementations that we've had, the criticality of those SQL servers being available for us, the criticality of those front-end app servers being available. Now if something goes bump in the night with active, Site 2 can actually just go through the Microsoft storage replication. So do you see a big place for this in the manufacturing sector?
Absolutely. When you focus on manufacturing particularly, you have to first understand that, a number of years ago, manufacturing started to shift from a inventory-based model to a just-in-time model. So a lot of manufacturing organizations you have, whether it be for that, water bottle that a company is using to fill up with their favorite spring water, or whether it be for a car, it doesn't matter. A lot of them are moving to this model where they don't have inventory on the shelf. So any downtime is a loss in revenue and a potential dissatisfied customer and a potential downstream penalty chargeback-wise. So having this active scenario, particularly across sites where, hey, something happens, we can run off of this different location is huge. And I think of this in ransomware because one of the techniques that we use is to divide our plant from our office network. So think of it conventionally as different VLANs. but we're really treating them as different sites. So if the office network, where people are, clicking on links in email and browsing to questionable sites, and typically, that's where somebody would plug in a rogue USB drive, any of those things that happen, that could shut down that office network, but production can then run from that active configuration that is located out on their plant side. So, it's an oversimplification of a complex design, but it really does show how this stretch cluster support can provide intense value to a 24/7 manufacturing operation.
Well, especially when we look at an attack at the ASICs level of the core networking gear, because, the attacks that everyone thinks of are limited to Windows servers and things like that, John. And, if somebody goes after and attacks our core switching infrastructure, just trying to shut things down as a malicious threat actor, it's not always just ransom that they're going after. They could have malicious intent coming in there trying to shut down a location. And so, yeah, absolutely. Great scenario.
And Dave, I just want to add one last comment on that, this is just an evolution of that VLAN segregation that a lot of us have been doing for a long time. And, there are other ways to handle it. You can do SQL log shipping and things like that. But when you have a very complex ERP system, for instance, that's managing your production, maybe you're doing line sequencing. So you're actually building things to order and then reverse packing them in a ship so that they come off on the other line exactly how they're going to be used. If they come off at the customer exactly as they're going to be used, any disruption, minutes worth of disruption, can cost tens of thousands of dollars. So that active configuration is a huge game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big pieces, when I look at the operational side of Azure Stack HCI, it's always a delegation model, role-based access control, the zero trust model that, we're all trying to strive to get towards. This is a big one for me, and this was a kind of a big missing piece with, the early versions of, Hyper-V and Hyper-V clustering and some of those pieces. We've always really had to try to strive to find answers towards that. And Microsoft provided us solutions with this, with, Azure Pack or, System Center Virtual Machine Manager and things like that. And the next evolution of, this truly seamless on-prem management from a unified interface in Azure is coming via, Azure Arc, and also the ability to natively see and manage all of these objects up in our Azure portal, because there's the rich role-based control that you can get via that Azure portal. It's so great. So from an operational perspective, John, do you maybe want to speak to the importance of the segmentation from an operational team perspective with, not limiting ourselves to Azure Stack HCI, but just, Windows clustering in general?
And thanks, Dave. I'm going to focus in a minute on the role-based access control that is so critical to getting to least privilege and, the zero managed implementations that we all want. These aren't new concepts or whatever, but they are more important than ever. Everybody believes it will never happen to them until it does. And then they scurry about with this look of terror on their faces, like, because I never believed this could happen to me, I don't know how to react to it. And, there's a couple things here. I tell every IT person I meet that if they don't think they're in IT security, they need to think harder, because everybody in IT has a role in IT security today. It's a fact of life. Second, any malware event is going to cost your organization. Any. And if we get into ransomware and things like that, we're talking huge. I live in a tiny little town in Northeast Ohio, and we've had 2 ransomware events this year alone that closed down the community hospital for 6 weeks. They couldn't do surgeries. They couldn't do that kind of thing. and that closed down a manufacturing facility where they had to spend 6 weeks literally just rebuilding every computer system they have. That's in a small town. So having role-based access control and being able to target what users, what admins are able to do is so critical to modern cybersecurity defense. So this integration into Azure, where we're getting some commonality, where the techniques we learned to do role-based management in Azure are now applying to our Azure Stack implementations, is just so valuable to an organization that is trying to prevent themselves from having, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars lost in a single cybersecurity incident.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the event that something does happen, native integration with, Azure Site Recovery for DR, having the ability to actually take and fail over kind of quite seamlessly over into, your Azure tenant, as well as being able to back up those key workloads with Azure Backup are two very valuable pieces of the equation, because sometimes things go bump in the night, John, and unfortunately they're not recoverable or not recoverable in the time that the business needs to bring them online. And that's where we've got DR, right? So that's where we've kind of got the traditional DR. And that could be as simple as, in your neck of the woods, there are natural disasters that occur. You could have a major snowstorm that comes in the winter that knocks out all the power. Further south, you could have hurricanes that come through. You look at the historic floods that you had in Houston a few years ago. I had friends that were managing data centers in Houston at the time, and they didn't have a good DR strategy for that gear, and they were shut down for quite some time. So don't ever forget about DR and backups with your solution, because no matter how good the hardware is, the hardware's not going to run very well without power, John.
Absolutely, and it is so nice to know, like with Azure and being able to recover into Azure, Azure basically gives every company the ability to have a warm site. And most companies, most organizations could never afford that. They could never afford to have something available to them that has the pipe and the power and the compute capabilities necessary to spin up all their workloads. And I can tell you from personal experience, there's an exact event that I could describe if we had more time, where we did DR up into Azure and run manufacturing operations from Azure for about 72 hours to deal with an instance. And yeah, our Azure bill for that month went up, but it was far less expensive than shutting down our customer because we didn't ship the product they need for that just-in-time kind of operation.
Absolutely, John. Absolutely. Now, the daily maintenance and operation of any of these solutions, and with the attack surface ever growing out there for our infrastructure that we put out there, one of the big things is just the number of updates and vulnerabilities that are fixed on a monthly basis just seems to be going up exponentially over what we've seen in the past years. And this is another one of my favorite innovations and updates that, Microsoft's been working on. And it's already released, Server 2022 Azure Edition, and that's the rebootless hot patching. And so, yeah, you heard me right. You heard a lot of announcements at the Microsoft Ignite show a few months ago, where, we're getting to the utopia of hot patching. So Microsoft's done a lot of innovation inside the kernel to make this available for us. I'll say that this is our first run at the kind of hot patching world that we have, but this is going to be so awesome, because for all of our administrators out there that manage servers today, go ahead, virtually put up your hands. I know you're all sitting at your desk putting up your hand, and your wife, if you're at home, is like, "Why are you putting up your hand? Nobody can see you." That's okay. That's okay. We've got to get this as an interactive experience. You all know that the cumulative updates that come down as part of our patch cycles require multiple reboots, and it's invasive for our organizations. We've got to fail over workloads. We've got to take and adjust load balancing rules. We've got to potentially take outages. So this ability to express fast update is so huge. and that's also a big part of Azure Stack HCI innovation and its kind of own platform product SKU, is we don't have a lot of the unnecessary patches that are coming down through the general Windows server stream of patching. So a lower footprint, lower attack surface, very cool. That big federal customer that I'm working with right now, John, we've set up cluster-aware updating and really, working like a charm for us inside of Azure Stack HCI. The patch time is a lot lower. And there's actually, I know that you're a huge PowerShell fan, so am I, PowerShell modules and such for managing these updates going across our clusters. So this is huge, because I think, didn't we recently document the process of hot patching? 2019 on-prem version of Storage Spaces Direct, and with our backup technology that we were using, I think we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 or so manual steps that needed to happen to get our hot and available, going to storage maintenance mode, and doing our reboot passes and watching storage jobs and resyncs and stuff like that. So anything that we can do to improve updates, congratulations, Microsoft. I have to applaud you on this, because that's a huge piece from us in the operational side of things. I know that this is your side of the house, John. What do you think about like the updates and improving this process from Microsoft?
Well, you're absolutely right. That last procedural guidance that we wrote together was I want to say between 70 and 80 steps, just like you thought. And updating is aggravating in the best case scenario for most IT admins I know. But it's absolutely necessary, particularly, again, as we think about cybersecurity. Because, here's the deal. I don't know how I can ever properly justify to any organization I'm part of that we were compromised by a threat that was patched in an update that we hadn't had applied. Right? It doesn't matter if I say, well, we only apply them on the weekend because we don't want to impact production or whatever, because the response is going to be, well, the fact that we were down for 6 weeks impacted production, right? So we always have that heartburn of between when a patch is released and when we can get it into that system and get it updated. Well, big constraint to that is the reboot cycle. We have to take the servers offline and reboot and those kind of things. So hot patching is huge. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Awesome. Operational support theme, because one of the things that I wanted to do with this session, really have a focus on the operational support side of putting this out there. John and myself, we're not the project team that would take and come through the first 2 weeks of the implementation and then hand it over to the operational team. We're typically the back end of that. So I always like to tell people, you can consider the kind of things that we do. We're kind of like from the end of the first month to the end of the 60th month. So we're kind of, month 2 to 60, that's what we look after. And so that's after the project team has rolled everything out. And, we're the ones that get phone calls late at night because, a plant is down or something's going on. And so some of the most critical parts of any type of hyperconverged infrastructure for me, John, is phone home support for critical alerts. So being able to do text or, I use the word lightly, paged out. Not really, we don't really have pagers anymore. Kind of like being, hey, John, I'm going to send you a fax that your Azure Stack HCI cluster is down. We'll use some more modern technology. Maybe we'll have some Teams messages coming through there. But one of the ways that Microsoft is doing this is integrated support by using Azure Monitor. So Microsoft's got published solutions out there to integrate all of the alerting through Azure Monitor and be able to enable that. And their hardware partners like Data On offer hardware-level alerting back through their Data On Must platform, for example. I'd just like to give Data On that give it a shout out because, once again, they're nice enough to sponsor this. So, phone home is so important, right?
Can't say enough about it.
have you had any incidences where you've had to use this type of technology in your production rollouts, John?
Particularly the Azure Monitor has been a huge game changer, and I don't want to. I know we're going to eat into our Q&A time here pretty soon, so I don't want to get long-winded like I am known to do. But being able to monitor things through a single pane of glass, or through a unified experience, such as that provided up in Azure, is just a big gain in eliminating some of the activity, some of the running around that IT pros have to do, right? We want them focused on reacting and solving the problem that caused an alert, not on trying to find the system that shows them what's going on. And so the monitoring and then the support are just critical pieces to that.
Awesome. And once again, there are strong management packs if you're still using System Center Operation Manager. There are management packs available for you. Vendor integrated support. I mentioned this now. I'm just going to touch base on this briefly because I know that Howard and the wonderful team from Data On are going to be presenting and behind us. This vendor integrated support is available for us as an integration through Windows Admin Center, and it gives us an access and insight into our servers for any of our most popular vendors. So if you haven't enabled that through your Azure Stack HCI or Storage Spaces direct deployments, do make sure you check that out from your favorite vendor of your choice. All right, so John, we have 3 little tips here, and then we're going to get into some Q&A. We are very, very big taking and walking down secure and protecting ourselves from the unknown. So what are some of the things that we can do from a cybersecurity perspective to help protect our Azure Stack HCI investments? Did I lose you, John?
Nope, I'm here, absolutely. And sorry about that delay. I wasn't sure if you were adding more. These tips are absolutely part of the drill because, as I said, there's what people tell you when they live in the world of it won't happen to us, that's a big company problem or whatever. And then there's what they tell you after it happens. And as IT pros, we have to live in that reality that many of our organizations, many of our leadership teams will look at us like, no, that malware stuff, that won't happen to us. We're a small organization. Nobody has any reason to get us, that sort of thing. And I tell people, I said, attacks nowadays, one, I want you to understand some things that differentiate them from even, 10 years ago. One, we have state-sponsored attacks. So attacks that are broadly targeted but are funded and backed by government organizations and the resources they bring to bear. A government can bring to bear resources that are totally different than even the best organized crime syndicate or anything else. The other is that, these attacks are much like what are known as home protection weapons, which are typically shotguns with very broad distribution of the attack. And so when they come, they don't target you because you necessarily have something to specifically offer them. They target you because, just like in a distributed denial of service attack, you offer a piece that, when combined with all the other pieces, produces a disruption. And so having a guarded fabric, for instance, where you can quickly respond and recover from a ransomware event that, let's say, locked up your sysvol on your production domain, is a big deal. It's a game changer, right? Recover in minutes and hours instead of days and months or days and weeks. The principle of zero trust is huge. As IT admins, we all like to think that we always need domain admin level creds. The fact is, you only need domain admins to access domain controllers and then only to do specific things. So zero trust not only protects the company, but it protects us. Because here's another thing I guarantee you. If it is your cached credential that is compromised, your leadership team will hold you accountable for that if the company is compromised. And then, things like ATP, Defender ATP, Azure ATP, all those things, they are next-gen level security things. Now, I know we think of early implementations of Defender and things like that, and we go, well, they never match up with, other products out there, whatever. And I liken that to comparing Internet Explorer 1.0 to what we have today in Edge. You're not comparing apples to apples, and the modern threat protection offered by Microsoft is what I consider to be the best out there. And so implement that advanced threat protection and hunting capability so that you can protect your Azure Stack HCI clusters and implementations.
Absolutely. All right. Tip number 2, and if you don't mind, John, I'll take this one, and then we'll come in together on the last one, do a little bit of Q&A, all right? This is a big one for me. I work very closely with the hardware vendors that are out there to try to make sure that we can get the best performing Azure Stack HCI and storage spaces direct solutions that are out there for our customers that we work with. And one of the most important pieces when you're building an Azure Stack HCI cluster or storage spaces direct cluster is you must stress test that prior to going into production so that you can build yourself a benchmark and baseline so you know how well this is going to perform under load. Microsoft has actually built a comprehensive testing suite called VM Fleet. It's become the de facto standard for stress testing our Azure Stack HCI and storage spaces direct environments. So, for example, when we buy this new 4 or 8 node cluster and we're supposed to be getting 1 or 2 million IOPS and 6 to 10 gigabytes a second of transfer, we know what this thing will kind of do under load. And it's the kind of thing that it's really hard to re-stress test again once we've got production workloads running on there. So one of the suggestions I have, and I know that our good friends at Data have been doing this for years, is they'll actually stress test the cluster in their factory prior to shipping it out to the customer, because then the customer can stress test it in their environment and they kind of compare baselines. And this will actually help us identify any switching, networking, hardware errors. Maybe one of the shippers dropped the box or played a little bit of Ace Ventura with it as it was coming and getting delivered to your location and kicked around. And so this just really helps us with that. So always stress test before going into production. And the last one, John, labs. Your training is so important when it comes to learning about these next-gen technologies. And a good friend of mine who's actually formerly Microsoft now, Jaromir Kaspar, I've had some beers with him in the Czech Republic, and man, did he ever build a cool GitHub repo for every single Azure Stack HCI or storage spaces direct scenario known to man. This one here is freely available. You can use his builder. You can build a lab environment via PowerShell, and you can test every single scenario available. And so, John, I think if you're okay with this, should we take a few questions now?
I think that sounds awesome, Dave.
All right. So, Scott, what do we have for questions that have come in so far?
Yeah, okay. We got quite a few here. First one is from Elise, who's wondering if you could talk about updates to Azure Stack HCI. You guys were discussing that a little bit, but what does it take? How long and how often can people expect to see updates and go through that patching cycle?
Okay, so I can speak to this one because, like I said, I'm the Canadian Federal building a couple of good-sized 8-node clusters right now. So our patch cycle, as we were going through, was taking us probably less than a couple hours to go through and hot patch everything. Now, remember, as you're going through with cluster-aware updates, you still have the process of having to basically drain all the VMs off of one of the nodes. We're going to take and put it into maintenance mode. We're going to pause the node in the cluster. We're going to take and apply the updates. We're going to bring it back online. We're going to fail back over all the VMs. So there is a convergence time inside of there from a live migration perspective and waiting for the storage jobs to successfully complete. So it's a tough question to directly answer because it really depends on the size of your cluster. But once again, if you're looking to get that time down for your operation team, my advice is you baseline and you benchmark that once you've actually got some production load on your cluster.
Okay, super. Next question. You guys had started out with a little bit of discussion on Storage Spaces Direct, and Vandana is asking, is Storage Spaces Direct evolving into Azure Stack HCI? Eventually will Azure Stack HCI replace Storage Spaces Direct? And, this is probably a good question for, maybe for Matt in the second hour, but what is the relationship, between those two technologies, especially for people who maybe haven't worked a lot with either one?
I can take this if that's okay with you, John. You want me to take this question?
Absolutely. Perfect, Dave.
Yeah, so the underpinning technologies inside of Azure Stack HCI are actually driven from Storage Spaces Direct. So basically the same command that you would manage on-prem Storage Spaces Direct in Server 2016, 2019, 2022, get storage job, get virtual disk, get storage pool, all the PowerShell commands are all still there and are all still available to you. From the roadmap that Microsoft has provided, I think we give like a 10-year life cycle to any version of Windows. That's pretty typical for Microsoft. And so when we look at this being included in the long-term servicing release of Server 2022, you still get a hefty lifespan of Storage Spaces Direct for our traditional on-prem customers that want to keep doing things the way that they're doing. So you'll just have two options. You'll have the Azure Stack HCI option, and then you'll have the way that you've been doing it with Server 2022 long-term servicing.
Super. Okay. Hey, and probably got time for one more question, and Adam has asked one that's kind of a nice sort of philosophical endpoint here. It says, would you consider HCI a good bridge for a company looking to move away from physical infrastructure without changing workflows, aka lift in place, move to the cloud? Any thoughts on that?
Dave, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump on this one.
Yeah, go for it.
And I'm going to say that it is a great bridge. It's not just a good bridge, it's a great bridge, right? And because Adam brings up a great point. For most organizations, lift and shift is not a great strategy. It sounds great, but it's that freighter analogy I gave you. Most organizations, they're steering a 400-foot freighter. They cannot turn on a dime. This isn't a regatta where they're going around a buoy, 180 degrees. So by migrating to HCI, just like you do other technologies like implementing Azure AD Connect and those kind of things to get your hybrid environment going, or Exchange Online and migrating your Exchange on-prem up into the cloud and that kind of thing, this allows you to do that over time. While not only losing capability, but providing enhanced capability, thus enhanced value to your organization, and allowing you to keep abreast and digest and gain expertise and qualifications in this new technology. Azure Stack HCI isn't going away anywhere in the short term, so beginning a transition, even if it's, a crawl, walk, run approach, I believe brings huge value to any organization that chooses to go with it. I hope that answers Adam's question.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was great. So it looks like that's all the questions we have time for. I really want to thank Dave Kawula and John O'Neill for some great information. And everyone, please stay tuned. This first hour has been a from the trenches look at best practices for Azure Stack HCI, from some highly experienced Microsoft MVPs. We're going to take a short break and be back in a few minutes for our second session, where Data On and Microsoft will provide a deep dive into Azure Stack HCI technology and explore some more real-life scenarios. So take the opportunity to check out those resources on your console provided by Data On and Microsoft, and we will be right back. Thanks again, and welcome back, everybody. So thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers, and of course to our sponsors, Microsoft and Data On, for underwriting the summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. So my name, again, is Scott Becker, Editor-in-Chief of RedmondMag.com, here to moderate the second session of our Microsoft Azure Stack HCI Summit. This hour is a deep dive into the Azure Stack HCI technology and real-life scenarios with Data On and Microsoft. So we have two great speakers for this session, Matt McSpirit from Microsoft and Howard Lowe from Data On. And Matt is going to be first up to give us the latest from Microsoft on Azure Stack HCI. Matt's a senior program manager focused on helping enterprises embrace Microsoft's Azure Edge plus platform technologies. His particular focus is the hybrid converged infrastructure solution, Azure Stack HCI, and the new Azure Kubernetes service on Azure Stack HCI. So we're in really good hands with Matt. Matt, welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here and follow up on a great session from the team just earlier. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into a few areas of Azure Stack HCI. In addition, explore some of the hybrid elements of Azure Stack HCI, because they are what ultimately, I think, differentiates Azure Stack HCI in the market. So we'll make that real with some cool scenarios. We've got some preview stuff to show you as well, which is very exciting, a cool demo video as well that I can walk you through. So that will really start to bring to life some of the things that the team discussed in the first session and some of the core capabilities of Azure Stack HCI that I'm going to discuss as well. Now, before we get into going into Azure Stack HCI in more depth, I want to take a step back and focus on Microsoft's broader hybrid strategy. And it's not just about hybrid where there's Azure, public cloud, and your on-premises environment, but it's hybrid and multi-cloud. We realize that organizations out there like yourselves have invested in on-prem technologies. You've invested in potentially public cloud technologies like Azure, but you've also may have invested in other cloud platforms, the likes of AWS, maybe GCP. There's reasons that organizations have for choosing a multi-cloud strategy. But at Microsoft, we want to ensure that through our Azure technologies, we can help you build the hybrid and multi-cloud solution that you're looking for. So it starts in Azure, where we have a host of services that you can consume within Microsoft data centers. But then more recently, we've brought to market a new technology known as Azure Arc, which is at a high level a control plane and management infrastructure that not only allows you to control, govern, and manage resources that exist outside of Azure from within the Azure portal, but it also unlocks the door to bringing some of those previously Azure-coupled services, so services that just lived in the Azure data centers, in Microsoft data centers, now to be able to run those on any infrastructure within your environment or within other clouds. And we'll explore that as we go forward, and that'll become more clear as we go through the session. So bringing Azure services to your infrastructure, your on-premises environment, or your alternative cloud platforms is a key element of our hybrid and multi-cloud strategy. We want to help you modernize your infrastructure that you choose to keep on premises. And Azure Stack as a portfolio, in particular Azure Stack HCI, the focus for today, is a hybrid by design hyper-converged solution that's going to enable you to do that, to bridge that gap between what you've got today and want to run and have a need to run on premises and integrating deeply with cloud-based services and technologies. And then we realize that there's a lot of organizations out there that have a need to integrate from an IoT perspective with key services and key capabilities. IoT is growing hugely within our customer base. And what we see there is that most of the IoT devices are not necessarily running in data center environments, but they're running at edge sites. They're running in supermarkets, in retail locations, manufacturing sites, out in the field, whether they be drones or cameras of some sort. These are devices that need securing, managing, deploying in some cases from a software perspective. So you need not only the control plane elements for that, but also investments in the silicon and the overall ecosystem around IoT. And Microsoft's making those investments and will continue to do so. So what we're delivering is this hybrid and multi-cloud offering that really helps enhance all of those different key areas. But let's dive in a bit more into Azure Stack HCI. It's a passion of mine. I'm hopeful it's a passion of many of yours as well. But one of the biggest changes with this new release, to give it its full name, Azure Stack HCI 20H2, which we launched back in December of 2020, and have been continually updating and improving, as we'll discuss going forward as well. One of the biggest changes versus perhaps traditional infrastructure solutions that you're used to is this is a Azure service, therefore it is a subscription. It's a modern subscription with cloud billing. You pay for what you use, but it does contain all of that familiarity of the hyper-converged infrastructure that many of you have known to love through Windows Server 2016 and 2019. So it's delivering on that enterprise scale through a great performance. We've got some good examples here as well. And the price, the value you get from Azure Stack HCI is just continuing to grow. And so when we delve into that specifically, just the HCI element, there's still folks out there that are still running. In many cases, we see it with many organizations that are running what we call a 3-tier infrastructure before they go down the hyper-convergence path of hyper-converging that infrastructure onto more of a standardized software-defined approach. So on the left here, what you see is a traditional legacy, if you will, 3-tier infrastructure, specialized storage infrastructure with a dedicated storage fabric, dedicated network infrastructure with a higher level of complexity, let's say, and then dedicated compute infrastructure running a hypervisor of your choice, hopefully Hyper-V, to consolidate workloads. And that's been successful for many years. But HCI over the last couple of years has continued to grow and grow and grow. Windows Server 2016, 2019 really helped to drive some of that as well. And what that's enabled organizations to do is not only consolidate physically, but also consolidate a higher density of workloads onto a lower cost of infrastructure solution in industry standard x86 servers, and let the power of software transform those physical devices from great partners like Dataron into the storage, network, and compute infrastructure they need, that hyper-converged infrastructure. And does it need to start big? Absolutely not. So Azure Stack HCI, one of the key benefits of Azure Stack HCI is it starts really small from form factor size, depending, our partners have got some great small scale form factors that are perfectly suited for Azure Stack HCI, right up to the largest environments. And I want to use retail as a good example of an environment or a vertical where we're seeing a lot of conversations happen right now around Azure Stack HCI and 2-node configurations going into retail stores. What's the benefit there? Well, 2 nodes gives you redundancy. So should one node fail or a component with the node fail, you've got redundancy there, which is important for those point-of-sale applications, those localized store applications that need to run there. It doesn't require dedicated switch infrastructure for the storage, meaning, as the graphic shows here, you can just link those servers in a mesh pattern to enable a direct connectivity between those nodes. And that's not just limited to 2 nodes. You can grow that beyond there depending on how many NICs you've got. What that means is it reduces your costs at those remote sites. No additional infrastructure required, no witness nodes, no extra footprint required beyond the 2 nodes to enable you to have a redundant solution with a very minimal configuration that still allows you to run your workloads in that remote site. So very cost effective, but still delivering the performance that you're looking for, and above all, the redundancy. But that can grow up to 16 nodes per cluster, as many of you would be already aware from previous Windows Server clusters. But beyond 16 nodes, we grow to thousands of servers with our cluster sets technology, which enables you to efficiently scale up and scale out that management of the environment. And you can see the numbers are big. Not only are they big, but they support key features that enable you to be efficient within your management of the infrastructure. So load balancing VMs is built in, no additional technologies required. Rebalancing of the storage is built in, no additional technologies required. So these are just a couple of highlights of the small scale, but also growing to the larger scale for those data center environments. And don't just take our word for it. We've got great recognition of Azure Stack HCI in a variety of different sources, whether it's let's see, Tech Innovators Winner 2020, the fastest we've seen a mid-market 4-node HCI cluster from Storage Review there, 1 million IOPS per server, so great performance and scale. And the team in the previous session touched on a VM fleet tool that can be used and is used very readily to validate your infrastructure that you've pre-deployed, that you're ready to deploy workloads onto. It's always a good idea to run those kind of tests and set the expectation of what performance you should be getting from that environment and identify any potential issues before you start deploying workloads. So that maximizing performance, Azure Stack HCI is going to give you that whilst reducing costs against comparable solutions using that legacy 3-tier infrastructure that we briefly touched on earlier. So we're seeing great value, we're seeing great performance, great scale, down to the small scale and the large scale. But what actually is it? Well, Azure Stack HCI is a specialized operating system for hyper-converged infrastructure running on your hardware on premises within your environment. It brings the capabilities of software-defined storage and networking, optimized for powerful virtualization infrastructure, but it trims out a lot of the components that are no longer required for this solution that previously would have existed in Windows Server. So this has evolved from a Windows Server background, but it's now its dedicated own operating system. So when you deploy, similar to how you would deploy a Windows Server infrastructure today, you can use your existing tooling like network-based deployment, USB, ISO, whatever your preference is, and from there you're into a server core-like experience designed for remote management experiences, whether that be from the Windows Admin Center, which is a free tool that many of you I'm sure are familiar with, whether that be from tools like System Center, if you've got those investments, PowerShell, everyone's good friend, or increasingly as we go forward from the Azure portal itself through Azure Arc. And I'll talk specifically about some of the integration we've got there with Azure Arc shortly. Now from there, I want to highlight one of the key enhancements, and the team did a good job of introducing this earlier on as well, that's unique to Azure Stack HCI as an operating system. Because one of the questions we often get is, okay, Windows Server isn't going away. This new Azure Stack HCI is designed for this hyper-converged infrastructure. What's some of the key differences going forward? That why should I run Azure Stack HCI on the Metal versus a Windows Server with Hyper-V? And one of the key initial differentiators in this first release, Azure Stack HCI 20H2, is the stretch clustering. And the stretch clustering is a built-in, no additional charges, it's included in the operating system, capability that allows you to stretch a single cluster across 2 locations. And what that provides you is flexibility of choice of replication, so synchronous or asynchronous, depending on your network infrastructure between those 2 locations, how far, latencies, etc. It gives you that automatic VM failover capability for a site local resiliency. So say in this example on the slide, London had an outage. VMs that were running in London and that have been replicated over to Paris would be running automatically in Paris with no intervention. So it gives you an incredibly powerful capability if you've got multiple sites that you need to bring under control and management, and you want to provide DR between those 2. Obviously, if you don't have second sites, then that's where you're looking at technologies in Azure like Azure Site Recovery as an alternative there. So there's a great option no matter what your setup is. So that's a bit about stretch clustering, and that's just one of the number of enhancements that we're bringing unique to Azure Stack HCI, and that will evolve and continue to grow, and that gap will continue to build as we go release on release. So remember, this is the first release, Azure Stack HCI 20H2. We're gearing up for another release, 21H2, in the not-too-distant future, where, again, you'll continue to get more and more infrastructure goodness and value and Azure integration. But before we go into some of those elements, I want to reinforce that this is a familiar experience for folks. So if you've got investments today in backup technologies for Hyper-V, great. It should just work just fine with Azure Stack HCI, and we've got a list of vendors that we've worked on our documentation, or worked with on our documentation that can highlight their solutions for Azure Stack HCI. The same goes for monitoring. The same goes for management. If you're using Windows Admin Center today, great. PowerShell, awesome. If you're using System Center, that's fine as well. If you want to move to more of an Azure management experience, that's where things really start to light up with Azure Stack HCI going forward as well. That hybrid design is front and center. And then from there, you've got a choice of deployment options. And I don't just mean there specifically to, do I use a USB or an ISO or a network boot? I mean, what do you deploy this onto? How do I choose the right hardware? Can I just install this on an old machine that's sat dusty in the corner, or do I need new hardware? Well, you've got a bit of flexibility here. So if we drill into that in a little bit more depth, firstly, we have an Azure Stack HCI catalog with well over 200 different solutions from our great partners, including the fantastic Dataron, who you'll hear from very shortly, and have a variety of different solutions that are available for you. But there's two categories that I'd like to classify these different systems into. Firstly, we have in the lower half of the pyramid there what we call an Azure Stack HCI validated node. They're on the Azure Stack HCI catalog. You may have existing hardware in your environment today that matches a configuration in the Azure Stack HCI catalog. And if that's the case, then you've got a validated node. You're good to go. This offers a broad choice of hardware options for different types of workloads. You can work closely with a designated SI partner for deployment and integration if you prefer, or you can do it yourself in-house. And as I said, if the hardware matches what's on our catalog, you can repurpose that hardware. But if you did have an issue and you knew it was a software issue, you would call Microsoft. If not, if you knew it was a hardware issue, you would call that particular OEM. And this is going to be a relatively popular option for organizations that have got suitable hardware existing or choosing new hardware in some cases. However, there's an additional tier or category of systems that are available to choose from within our Azure Stack HCI catalog that we're terming integrated systems. And these are more of an appliance-like experience. They deliver a higher time to value, receiving the systems through to deployment and implementation and running your workloads. They're enhanced due to the fact that they've got this new full stack update capability. I think the team, Dave and John, earlier touched on some of these elements. When you think about updating infrastructure, it's not just about updating an operating system. There's hardware, there's drivers, there's firmware, all of those things you need to manage to provide the level of efficiency for a hyperconverged infrastructure to be reliable. And we want to make that as easy as possible. So our new full stack update features across Azure Stack HCI and driven by Windows Admin Center makes it upgrading easy and efficient and quick, and integrates both hardware and OS-based considerations there. Now, one benefit of support across this integrated system is that no matter who you call, you don't need to pre-diagnose the issue to be a hardware or a software issue. You call either Microsoft or the OEM of choice, and through a comprehensive ticket exchange system that we have in our backend, we're able to triage that collectively together and give a better support experience. So Azure Stack HCI integrated systems, definitely if you were looking at new hardware today, certainly look for the integrated systems. But by no means, if you've got existing hardware, check the catalog for existing support and ask any questions of your OEM as well. We're happy to help and answer more of those as well. So they're your deployment scenarios, at least from a hardware perspective. So the final area, and I wanted to build up to this because in my view, the hybrid nature of Azure Stack HCI is its biggest differentiator in the market, in a crowded market of hyperconverged solutions. This integration with Azure, by design, it's not an afterthought, it's by design, enables you to benefit from those cloud capabilities that are unique to Microsoft that we can bring down to Azure Stack HCI in all sorts of different forms. So when I think about how that native integration starts, to get into the weeds ever so slightly, it's built in. So within the Azure Stack HCI operating system, within what's running on the metal, we have the Azure Arc, the Azure integration right there. So you don't need to install anything separate. There's no agents to deploy. There's no specialized scripts to run, just a couple of commands, and you will register your Azure Stack HCI cluster to an Azure subscription of your choice. Once registered, the first 60 days are free. You get a free trial there to test it out, kick the tires, and then post 60 days, that's when the billing will start to run. All of that, as I said, is built in. So right within your Azure portal, that familiarity, that rich experience, side by side with your native Azure workloads, you can now see your Azure Stack HCI clusters and start to perform additional tasks and introduce additional services and integrate with those appropriately in Azure. So you really do build a solid foundation that's hybrid enabled by design. So leading on to that side of Azure Arc, Azure Arc is, as I said, key and as an integral part of Azure Stack HCI as the platform. What it enables you at a high level to do is, firstly, when you register that Azure Stack HCI cluster, you gain visibility of that Azure Stack HCI cluster as an object in Azure, side by side with other native Azure workloads that you may be running and managing. So you've got visibility. You can start to apply tagging and apply governance and control. But then it opens the door to bringing additional applications and additional services down onto that Azure Stack HCI cluster in a very easy and streamlined way. So not only does it mean you can open the door to things like easy Kubernetes deployments on-prem, but also then running additional Azure services that that previously have only lived in an Azure cloud, now they can run on premises. What does that solve for? Well, if you have a data compliance requirement that data needs to reside on premises, data regulations, a networking latency challenge, so you can manage from the cloud, but running applications in the cloud, certain applications is a stretch too far, or run them on premises. Run those same Azure services on premises on top of Azure Stack HCI. And this will make more sense a bit later on as we visualize this a little bit later. But I wanted to walk you through very quickly and how easy it is to register a cluster within the Azure Stack HCI environment. So what we have here is a Windows Admin Center view. And this Windows Admin Center is managing an Azure Stack HCI cluster, lots of nice graphs and dashboards that are present on the main dashboard screen there. But in the top right-hand corner with the red square around it, there is a little link to say, register this cluster. And once you click and you authenticate, in this case with an MSDN subscription, a little bit old school there, Visual Studio subscription nowadays. It could be any Azure subscription that you've got that's appropriate for this, and you can check our docs for the specific requirements. You choose a resource group and a particular region that you want to register your Azure Stack HCI cluster to. And this is a mandatory part of the process. This isn't an optional part. This is a key part. If you don't register within the 30 days, the first 30 days, the cluster will be deemed out of policy, out of compliance, and you wouldn't be able to deploy new highly available virtual machines on the cluster. So it's definitely something you want to do sooner rather than later to benefit from the full functionality. And once registered, it appears in the Azure portal. And you can see it side by side with all of your other Azure resources, whether they be resource groups, storage accounts, Kubernetes clusters, whatever it may be. So everything there under one roof. And from there, you can then start to enable some of the additional functionality that Azure provides, whether that be monitoring, whether that be security enhancements, site recovery, backup, and more. And that actually leads me nicely onto a demo that I'd like to show you, and it's going to be in video form, but I'm going to talk you through what's happening here. And this is some new innovation that we've just brought to preview in the last couple of weeks. And we're calling it Azure Stack HCI Insights. And what this is using the technologies in Azure, Azure Monitor in particular, integrated with Azure Stack HCI to bring you a cloud scale view of your on-premises infrastructure. Imagine you're a retail site and you've got hundreds of small clusters scattered around the infrastructure. The centralized monitoring is key to managing those efficiently. Imagine you're a larger scale environment with lots of large clusters. Again, same benefit, that centralized monitoring and visibility and alerting into what's happening within the Azure Stack HCI infrastructure. So that seamless integration through Azure Stack HCI through to Azure Arc, no agents, no special scripts to deploy. Onboarding is incredibly easy, and the benefit from there is you can then start to monitor very efficiently from Azure. So I'm going to kick off the video and talk you through some of those elements here and help illustrate what's happening there. So what we've got here is a view in the Azure portal. And you can see I've got a 3-node Azure Stack HCI cluster called San Diego in this case. 3 nodes, that's all we've got in this particular environment. And they've been onboarded into Azure already through the registration process, very straightforward. And you'll see I can start to integrate and enable things like logs, insights as we discussed, manage policy, governance, enable certain security enhancements as well. But let's drill into the monitoring specifically. So here you see for this particular cluster, I've gone into the capabilities section here and looking at logs and monitoring. And I've already gone ahead and turned on the Azure Monitor workspace, turned on the log analytics capability, because that takes a few moments, and that's not the most interesting element of this experience. But it's incredibly easy, and what it enables me then to do is start to show you powerful monitoring views about my Azure Stack on-premises HCI infrastructure. Health alerts, CPU, memory, storage, drives, volumes. I get health and availability and visibility into all of those elements. And furthermore, if I drill into Azure Monitor specifically, it's got the Azure Stack HCI integration front and center. We can see that I've got a little bit more work to do to onboard the remaining 580 of my clusters. I've just done the 4 so far. Well, long days for me. But what you find here is I can quickly get visibility into all of my monitored clusters. In this case, as I said, 4 of the 584 monitored. And of those, I can see the different versions of the operating systems that are running. Under Overview, I can see my 4 clusters. So now it's drilling and allowing me to see those 4 clusters specifically that are under monitoring. And what I can see here is I can adjust the time zones or time ranges for these particular views, whether I want to adjust and filter a certain subscription, and if I prefer to filter out certain clusters that have been discovered. So I've got some fairly simple filtering capabilities there that are enabling me to view the most important information for me. And so far, green is good. Everything is healthy, so that's great. And you'll see now I've actually got 4 nodes in my San Diego cluster. So behind the scenes, I actually added another cluster to my Azure Stack HCI infrastructure. Because it's part of an already registered and managed cluster, that automatically gets onboarded to the monitoring as well. Now, under virtual machines, if I want to start to get a view of what the state of my virtual machines that are running across all of my clusters that are now managed through this experience, I can see in this case the Boston node's got 2 VMs running small environments, and I can see the different states that those VMs may be in. From a storage perspective, storage performance is critical to overall HCI performance, so we need to make sure that that's all operating efficiently. And so if I expand San Diego and Boston here, we can see the volume views, we can see trends of usage in terms of capacity, trends in IOPS, trends in throughput, latency, all of these very relevant storage views. And remember, this is all presented to me centrally from Azure, aggregated across all of my different clusters. And then everyone loves a good graph. And what you see here is across the 4 clusters that I'm managing, or monitoring in this case, I can see the different usage over different time periods, latency across volumes, IOPS trends, throughput trends. And this is Azure Monitor. So right at the top of the screen, you'll see the pencil icon to customize. So if you don't like these graphs, or you want to build some graphs that are more specific to your needs and dashboards that represent the things that are most important to you, you can go right ahead. And so to learn more about that, there's an aka.ms link, but if you do a search online for Azure Stack HCI Insights, you'll find that information available for you. It's incredibly compelling, and this is just the start of what we're doing around multi-cluster management and monitoring going forward. So to summarize some of the benefits there, always up to date, it's easy to set up, very, very scalable, and it's incredibly customizable. So no big challenges there. You can really tailor this to what you need it to be. We've touched on many of these integration points with Azure services, so very easy to onboard once your clusters are registered to the security center, to monitor, to site recovery, to update management. All of these Azure services that do live in Azure, once your cluster is onboarded, you get the big benefit of being able to integrate those very, very seamlessly and easily. And just since GA, which was December, we've talked about multi-cluster monitoring. These are enhancements that are coming release on release, and we have a preview channel that you can test a number of these capabilities out within. So register for our preview channel, register your clusters. You then are exposed to more of these new capabilities like the multi-cluster monitoring and deeper Arc integration. So you've got all of that available to you as you go forward. We streamline the way we activate virtual machines on the platform now with AVMA, enhancing or easing the ability for you to manage your licensing within your virtual machines and activation specifically. And secured core server is utilizing hardware, firmware, and the OS itself to provide enhanced protection against current and future threats. So this is incredible innovation that's not just happening at the OS level, but also in conjunction with our hardware partners. So these are enhancements, again, coming to Azure Stack HCI very soon in the next release. So In terms of roadmap, just to give you an indication of where we're going here, we delivered a load of stuff last calendar year and released the product in December of last year. In terms of all of those great solutions in the catalog, the full stack updates, improvements in storage, the stretch clustering we talked about. But going forward in this half of the calendar year and into next calendar year, we're enhancing not only the underlying HCI solution itself that runs on the Metal, but also the solution that wrappers the Azure Stack HCI operating system in terms of the Azure integration. So there's lots of innovation that's happening at all the different places, whether it's monitoring at scale in Azure, whether it's deploying VMs from the Azure portal down to your Azure Stack HCI clusters. That's awesome. Regional expansion, so being able to register clusters into different Azure cloud regions, enhancements to storage, networking, GPUs going forward, thin provisioning for storage spaces direct. These are all cool stuff that you will see and hear more about very, very soon. And we've already published some previews of videos of these things. And if you're interested in trying some of these things out, get on board with the preview channel and we'll be happy to work with you on that. So why and when would you use Azure Stack HCI? Well, it's a modern platform. So if you're thinking about modernizing and enhancing security within both your data center and your edge locations, it's an incredible solution for that, for bringing those hybrid capabilities, those hybrid services down to those environments and enabling you to manage at scale. Deploy those mission-critical SQL servers, for example, whether they are in VMs or whether they're containerized. It's a new angle for SQL Server deployments going forward. We've talked about performance and what Azure Stack HCI delivers, and this is a perfect example of a workload that benefits wholeheartedly from great performance. And then finally, bringing that integration with Azure, enabling you to deploy cloud-native applications. So if you look at this graphic here at a high level, fantastic hardware on the base, then you've got the Azure Stack HCI operating system making the most of that powerful hardware, enabling you to run traditional VMs, Windows, Linux, and your applications within. But from there, we've also released at Build, just a couple of weeks ago, the Build conference, our new Kubernetes platform to run on Azure Stack HCI called AKS on Azure Stack HCI. Brings the best of AKS as an Azure platform and enables you to run on premises on top of Azure Stack HCI. Easy to deploy, easy to manage through Azure Arc, and enables you not only to run your containerized applications on-prem, but also unlocks the door to bringing additional Azure services like the Arc-enabled data services, our Arc-enabled app services, Arc-enabled machine learning. These are Azure services that previously only ran in the Azure data center. Now you can decouple them from Azure and run them on premises on Kubernetes, specifically here on AKS on Azure Stack HCI. So if you've ever wanted to run Azure Web Apps or Azure SQL managed instances on premises, now is the time on the Kubernetes platform running on top of Azure Stack HCI. So to summarize, the native integration with Azure is key. It really does unlock the door to so many new and exciting hybrid opportunities. It scales from 2 nodes up to much larger environments, great integration with our partners to ensure you have a seamless and streamlined updating and experience, great performance, powerful DR capabilities, security updates for legacy operating systems, so 2008 R2, 2012 R2. Those operating systems, if you're running those Windows Server and SQL Server versions and you want to run them on Azure Stack HCI, you'll benefit from the extended security updates for those products at no cost. And it's an awesome platform for Kubernetes as well with AKS HCI. So check out the catalog. Make sure if you're interested in purchasing or using Azure Stack HCI that your hardware is from the catalog, that you can utilize that to check whether your existing hardware is on there or if you need new hardware. And you can download the software if you've got existing hardware that you want to try it out, and you'll get the 60 days for free for the usage. We've got some great learning paths to help you understand and learn more and build your knowledge of Azure Stack HCI, both from a fundamentals of the hyperconverged infrastructure, but also the Arc and the hybrid elements, which are critical in that overall view of Azure Stack HCI. So definitely some useful resources there that you can work through in your own time. And loads of other resources to both read. There's some great video content, demos, of a variety of things like I've shown and more. And obviously you can get started by downloading. There's even an eval guide that you can run inside an Azure VM if you want to kick the tires there as well. So with that, that was a whistle-stop tour. I will thank you for your time. I'll stick around for questions, and I'll hand back to Scott.
All right, great. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, really good stuff. Great whistle-stop tour. Appreciate the demo as well. So next up, we're going to hear from Howard Lowe at Data On, and Howard is the Vice President for Sales and Marketing, and previously he's held leadership positions at JED Networks, Emulex, Intel, and Motorola. So we're in great hands with Howard. Howard, welcome and take it away.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Great content, Matt. Really great introduction to Microsoft and Azure Stack HCI. And for those who attended the earlier session with Dave Koala and John O'Neill, you also got a good preview of why them as customers and really professionals really appreciate the technology that Microsoft has brought forward for the last 10 years. In my presentation today, I hope to share the journey that Data On and our customer has gone through with the Azure Stack HCI and making that choice, making the Microsoft choice as you consider all the options out there in technology in the marketplace today. So to start off with, as a background for those who don't know who we are as Data On, we're a technology company based in Southern California. We've been helping customers for the last 30-plus years to really help modernize their IT. We are an exclusive Microsoft partner. What that means is really we build our entire technology resources, knowledge around Microsoft to make sure that we deliver the best solution in knowledge base to our customer. We're also exclusively focusing on Intel platform. We're not a manufacturer of hardware. We're a hybrid cloud vendor who really deliver the solution architecture technology for our customer to run your workload. At the same time, provide you the necessary support that you need to run your infrastructure for the next 3 to 5 years. As you heard from Dave and John O'Neill, the number one concern for any customer is to make sure when there are issues, there are a company or organization that can help you resolve those problems and provide the necessary support. And Data On in the Microsoft world has really been shining in that aspect. We really pride ourselves on dedicating the support for our customer to make sure that when they have issues, we deliver that seamless experience for our customers. On top of the solution from Microsoft and Intel as a hardware, Data On continue to add value with our software. As also alluded to earlier in the conversation, Data On have our own monitoring and software called Must. The goal is to really extend the capability of Microsoft single pane of glass with Windows Admin Center to provide additional values. That additional value could be hardware level monitoring. It could also be making sure the upgrade process, the firmware driver is seamless. So admin can focus on running your production workload and not worry about infrastructure. And we'll show a demo of that a little bit later. From that perspective, we deliver a great solution, a validated and integrated system for Microsoft, and we're also a cloud service providers for our end users. So as a company, our goal is to really deliver that complete experience, turnkey experience. Starting off with is delivering a complete hardware-level infrastructure that's certified, validated by Microsoft. There are many, many, many technology partners out there that deliver this validated solution in addition to Data On, and they're all great. But at the end of the day, when the customer makes a Microsoft choice, really you need to look at a vendor who you are comfortable working with, who has the knowledge and commitment to this technology to help you run your infrastructure. Because these are production workloads. These are edge platforms. These are workload that you depend on your daily application. So you really need to have someone that really understands the technology and really architect a solution for you. As you continue forward, as you have production running, what is a business continuity solution for you? Backup, DR, do I use Azure Site Recovery as a backup? Do I build a DR? All these are conversations that Data On want to have with our customer to make sure we understand your requirements. An extension, we want to provide added value with our Must software for monitoring, and also really offer a comprehensive view on what a hybrid cloud is. So as a CSP, we really will educate our customer from that perspective. The journey that Data On has taken for the last 10-plus years with Microsoft really has made us that company that really understands the technology, the foundational technology. As you'll see that Data On made the Microsoft choice when Microsoft introduced the technology software-defined storage with storage spaces in 2012. As you progress forward to today, 2021, when Microsoft had really proven they have a really incredible stack that is enterprise-proven, enterprise-ready to run your production workload, Data has gone through that journey with Microsoft. In that journey, we have deployed over 150 petabytes of storage on the Microsoft technology, and we have over 850, maybe even over 1,000 customers now, and these are enterprise customers that's running data on solution based on Microsoft and Intel. And these customers are just not small, medium enterprises. It could be large company. It could be edge customer, robo. It could be in the federal government, state, local government, financials, manufacturing. You'll see that it really is a broad spectrum of enterprise customers that have also made a Microsoft choice on data on and with Microsoft. With Microsoft, since 2016, I believe there's only over 30,000 clusters that's enabled with S2D. But just with data alone, we have many, many customers that's made a Microsoft choice, and we get a chance, come visit our website. We have a lot of customer story, which you'll get a good experience on why they made the choice, what were the challenges they face making that choices, and what are the workload they use. It's a really good introduction in why many of your peers in the market is making that decision. So solution, we talked about why HCI, why S2D, and why Microsoft delivered that solution. But at the end of the day, you need to have a vendor that really architect a complete stack for you, from the infrastructure hardware to loading the software and really configuring everything properly, to making sure we understand the workload you want and what are the hybrid services you want to deliver, but ultimately servicing that entire solution for you 24/7 for the next 3 to 5 years. And that's what Data do. We provide a complete infrastructure as a turnkey solution. You saw earlier on the slide that with the new Azure Stack HCI, Microsoft really has showcased the capability of multiple tiers. And at the highest tier, we were talking about integrated system. And really, integrated system was introduced by Microsoft to show that, hey, we want the customer to have a great experience deploying Azure Stack HCI. We want the experience to be appliance-like. They don't have to worry about how to do upgrades, firmware driver, software. They want to make sure they have the best support across the board. That's what Data deliver. On top of that guarantee from Microsoft. Now, you'll hear today, very exciting that we are announcing our brand new Ice Lake platform. That's the 3rd generation Xeon processor from Intel, which really moved the platform to a next level from PCI Gen 3 to PCI Gen 4 technology. With integrated system, Data want to make sure we deliver that experience for you hassle-free. With our Must Pro software, which you'll see a demo a little bit later, you'll see that now you can upgrade all your hardware stack and software stack seamlessly with a single click button, which before you might have to take a note down for maintenance. And these are really incredible innovations and technology integration that Data has done with Microsoft to bring that experience to our customer. Lastly is support. The joint support between Data and Microsoft and our partners ensures that when you have any issues, it's a single phone call you make to make sure you have that support you need to bring your system up to date. You'll see today, if you visit our website, we have several choices. We're not a hardware provider of many different configurations, but we really focus on specific delivery architecture that meets the workload that our customer have. Whether or not it's a very dense form factor for your Edge or 1U or SQL workload, whether or not it's a hybrid design where you have a lot of capacity that could scale from 50 terabyte to 200 terabyte usable capacity, or really you want to run a SQL workload or Kubernetes workload where you need a lot of flash. All these are capability and design that today is available with Data. With our Must Software and Must Pro, you will really get that real-life monitoring and capability for our customers. And we'll do a quick demo of that right now.
In this video, I will be demonstrating Data-On's Must Pro Snap-in for Windows Admin Center. Must Pro is an included feature with Data-On's integrated systems that allow users to seamlessly perform Microsoft software patches as well as hardware updates on the HCI cluster. For this demonstration, I have two of Data-On's integrated AZS 212 models that are directly attached, creating a 2-node storage spaces direct cluster. To show you how this works, I'll have to click on Updates on the left-hand side. I'll enter my domain admin credentials. The first page you'll see is the status page. To kick off the cluster-aware updating, I'll click on the Check for Updates button. As you can see, the first tab scans for Microsoft software patches. I currently do not have any for this cluster. The next tab will take us to Must Pro. There are two options for Must Pro: an online mode, which will grab the necessary files from the internet, or there is an offline mode, which will require you to get the package from Data-On and have it locally on your network. For this example, I will use the online mode. Once you click Submit, Must Pro goes to work and will take an inventory of all the nodes in your HCI cluster. The first column displays Data-On's latest validated versions. There are different icons that represent different statuses. The blue icon with the eye in the middle is simply notifying the administrator that there is an update available. In this example, you can see that my two Data-On nodes have an older version of the firmware and driver for the Mellanox adapters. Once I have selected the two adapters to update, I'll click Install, and Microsoft's Cluster Aware Update will take control and orchestrate these hardware updates. Once the process finishes, you will see that both nodes say they succeeded in applying the HCI hardware stack updates.
The main reason why I want to show you guys that video is I really want to articulate the fact that the experience that our customer and Data-On customer with Microsoft Azure Stack HCI, you really could have a seamless experience of managing your platform without any hassles. Ability to have a single click, ability to update your firmware, driver, hardware, which many of you have experienced, just makes so much easier when everything's orchestrated to cluster-aware update. In summary, for Data-On, we're really a turnkey solution. Our goal is to really understand the customer requirement and take the customer through the phase of design, deployment, post-deployment, and support to make sure you have that seamless experience. There are many, many customers that made the Microsoft choice, as I alluded earlier. Please visit our website. I won't go through all of them specifically to share with their experience why they did it. And one great customer that's really running Azure Stack HCI Scratch Cluster today, which Dave and John O'Neill alluded to, is Benetton School based in UK. They're running their entire workload on Azure Stack HCI, 2-node Scratch Cluster across their entire campus, and they're seeing great results. You'll see customer running Robo on Edge. Trident SQL has over 13 locations across the U.S. running 2-node solution on the edge. You'll see that you have many customers running branch offices. You have customers running SQL workload using Intel Optane technology across the board. And lastly, you see the entire Canadian Museum running Azure Stack HCI, both for their production, backup, and also bulk storage. So you can see the application of Azure Stack HCI really scale for the same software from 2 nodes all the way up to 16 nodes, and from minimum 1 terabyte to petabyte level storage. Many, many customers have edge and branch offices. Lastly, in terms of computing box, it's important to understand that as you continue to evaluate the technology, understanding that with Azure Stack HCI and Microsoft, you really could get the latest innovation for x86 hardware architecture. Today, you have Xeon Gen 3 technology, Optane technology, and NVMe. As you move forward, the technology continues to shift. I'm really excited to share the fact that with the transition that Intel has announced, Data is transitioning our entire platform from a Xeon Gen 2 to Xeon Gen 3 technology. With that shift, you're getting new processor, new compute, new storage, new memory stick, new platform across the board. Now you have PCI Gen 4, which really doubled the bandwidth. You have more I/O and more innovation in terms of GPU support. And these are the new Intel third generation Xeon processor that Data will be introducing this month, and our new integrated sensor for Azure Stack HCI. With AZS 6112, 6212, and 6224, our goal is to provide a breadth of capability to our customer to run your production workload. You'll see that these production workload really is a very simple design with 4 nodes with a fabric across the board. When you visit our website, you'll see many, many use cases, a lot of benchmark. Definitely do visit our website to look at the different IOPS, performances, throughput that you could get with Azure Stack HCI to deliver that experience you want. Lastly, as a conclusion, I think it's important to understand that as we go through the entire experience with the customer, including yourself today, the goal is really understand what we can do to help you. And really, as a company and Microsoft vendor, we want you to convert that entire experience from VM migration to running your production world to test and validation. All these are capabilities that Data want to deliver to our customer for business continuity across the board. Thank you for opportunity to present to you guys, and really we hope to take on this journey of hybrid cloud with all of you, and we'll open for questions.
Great. Thanks, Howard.
Back to you, Scott.
Good stuff. Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, there's the Q&A console. Go ahead and type in any questions that you have, but I'm going to direct this first one to Matt to give Howard a chance to have a drink after talking for a bit. So, Matt, what's likely to be the game changer for customers with Azure Stack HCI? You went through a lot of features, but what's sort of the big takeaway?
Yeah, thanks. And I think the big one for me, and hopefully the presentation kind of got this across, was this hybrid nature of Azure Stack HCI. It's the first and most unique hyperconverged solution that's essentially come from the cloud as a source. And that hybrid nature, the integration with Azure for that on-prem resource, it brings those new management capabilities, discovery, a single pane of glass for not only your on-prem resources, but side by side with your cloud-based resources as well. And the icing on the cake going forward is that ability then to use Azure to then start deploying workloads down to HCI. So that's a game changer, I think, if I had to think of it that way, for Azure Stack HCI that differentiates previous options. Okay.
Yeah, and I think one more for you before I turn to Howard. You went through some use cases, but what can people really use Azure Stack HCI for?
I think if you're weighing up what's next for you with your on-premises infrastructure and you've got a need to modernize the data center, it's great for that. It's hybrid by design. It's designed with modern capabilities. It's going to enable you to achieve higher levels of DR and performance and scale at an incredible value point, especially when combined with data on hardware. It's great for the edge, and Howard talked about a number of examples there where organizations are utilizing this 2-node cluster. Great for edge locations, redundant, great performance and scale at the same time. And those use cases, I think, are very, very great examples of where Azure Stack HCI fits really well. But then if you're looking to run high-performance workloads like SQL, that needs great performance, and HCI really gets the best out of the underlying hardware, both storage, networking, and compute, to deliver that performance needed by workloads like SQL. And that's whether it's running as a VM or whether it's running on a more cloud-native, modernized platform like Kubernetes, which is, again, one of the key use cases, running those modernized applications on Azure Stack HCI that have been containerized.
Okay, super. In Howard, why do customers choose Data On as their preferred vendor to provide Azure Stack HCI solutions?
That's a great question. We speak to many customers, and as I alluded earlier, there are many great vendors out there that provide good hardware infrastructure. I think customers choose Data On because we are exclusively focused on the technology. We really understand how to architect, design, and support complete infrastructure that's running their mission-critical workloads. Data On is known for support services. Data On is known for the fact that we're with the customer throughout the process, the good and the bad. And having that confidence with the customer is really why Data On is chosen by many customers as the preferred vendor, because we deliver great infrastructure technology and we provide great, awesome support along with Microsoft to make sure you have the peace of mind when you're running your production workload on a Data On infrastructure in Microsoft.
Kind of drilling into that a little bit, what are some of the main benefits of choosing an integrated system from Data On?
Yeah, I think going to an integrated system and this journey of 10 years, Microsoft introduced integrated system. I think there's three key components to it. Number one is clearly support, having a support organization along with Microsoft so you could call in and have both Microsoft and Data On to be there 24/7 to support your infrastructure is important. Number two is making sure you have the right infrastructure that's the best breed technology, performance-wise, reliability, resiliency. The last one is really the aspect of management and monitoring. Data On integrated system comes with our Must Pro and Premium package, which allows you to update, upgrade your software and hardware capability seamless in the background and with the cluster war orchestration. By doing that, really, you could really put a system in the right mode, and when you go back to sleep, when you come back in the morning, all the firmware drivers updated without you have to think about it. This is a great technology and solution, an integrated system that allows you to have a peace of mind.
Super. Matt, one for you. How do I buy Azure Stack HCI?
Well, fortunately, it's very easy. Firstly, you need some hardware. So that's where you would give Howard a call and say, can you help me? And I'm sure he would. Or if you've got existing hardware that matches a solution in the catalog, then you're good to go. You need an Azure subscription. As I mentioned, registering Azure Stack HCI is part of the overall process, and that's how you unlock a number of the capabilities. So registering to an Azure subscription is of course, important. And then finally, we recommend obviously having some Azure support in place, and there are a variety of options for Azure support. You may already have some in your environment, or you may be looking at a new contract for that purpose. So those are the three main things I would say. Obviously, you've got to download the software as well if you've got existing hardware.
Okay. Yeah, in kind of a related question, can I use existing licenses of SQL Server or Windows Server with this new HCI product?
Yes, you can, and it's a good clarifying point because we often get questions around, okay, I've subscribed to Azure Stack HCI, does that give me my guest operating system licenses included? And the answer is no. So you still need to license your guests. Now, if guests being the VM workloads that are running on top. Now, if you do have existing Windows licenses that can be used for guest VMs, and SQL's like any other software you can run on this system, so you can move licenses around, they do need to be licensed separately. Now, one thing to note here is, and I called it out briefly at the end of the session, at the end of my piece, was extended security updates, which some people may be familiar with if you're running legacy operating systems like 2008 R2 Windows Server, SQL Server 2008, 2008 R2, and 2012 and 2012 R2 for both of those products as well. They are essentially either at end of life or approaching end of life. So we're in the extended security updates phase for those operating systems and applications. To keep those patches available for you and to provide those security updates, there's normally a fee associated with those. However, if you run those workloads or migrate them over to Azure Stack HCI, then those extended security updates will be available at no cost. So to reiterate, that's Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2, 2012 and 2012 R2, and SQL Server 2008, 2008 R2, 2012 and 2012 R2. So if you run any of those on Azure Stack HCI, your extended security updates will be free.
All right. Thank you. Good stuff. This last one, we've got time for one more question. I'm going to direct this one to Howard. As a news guy, I always appreciate it when somebody breaks some news in one of our events. Or, Howard, can you tell us a little bit more about the new Xeon Gen 3 platform you just announced today supporting Azure Stack HCI?
Yeah, it's actually really exciting for us. And as technology innovation continue, as you know, Microsoft Azure Stack HCI really take advantage of the new innovation with x86 architecture. And we're excited to announce today that the new Xeon Gen 3 processor-based platform now available and certified with Azure Stack HCI. That is huge. I think we're the first one in the marketplace doing so, and we have the product ready to go. And with the innovation of technology, now you have PCI Gen 4 technology on your platform, which essentially double all your bandwidth. You can use the newest technology and really unlock many of the performance capability that you want and security that you've been waiting for. So we're excited that we spent a long time making sure these platforms are certified and validated, and now we're ready to introduce them to our customer and have them running the newest platform from Intel and Microsoft.
All right, super. Well, Howard and Matt, I really want to thank you guys for your presentations today. This is such an interesting space right now, and you guys went through a lot of really good material. So thanks very much for the presentation. And now it's time to announce the winner of our random drawing. Congratulations to Desmond Vassell with Vasco Technologies. You've won the Surface Pro 7. So our team will be in touch with you on how to claim your prize. So that's it for our summit today. Thank you all so much for attending. You'll get your replay email in the next few days. We hope you enjoyed this event. And please do take the survey that pops up when you exit. Thanks again, and thanks to our sponsors, Microsoft and Data On.
Thank you, everybody.